Thanks for joining me for episode 8 of my podcast series, Cybersecurity Kept Simple, 24x7, 365. My first exposure to a major vulnerability that was exploited was in 2001. I worked for an internet hosting provider and was assigned to the account of a major energy provider. We had dozens of Microsoft Internet Information Servers, or IIS, running when we found out about a serious vulnerability with the software. Code Redworm was a major cyber attack that affected almost 400,000 computers globally, causing an estimated $2.6 billion in damage. When Microsoft released the patch to fix the vulnerability, we immediately patched our test and production servers, and the client had no issues in either environment. Unfortunately, however, one of our colleagues had left unpatched versions of IIS in the development lab while she was working through some issues with the client. A couple of development websites for this major client were infected, and even more embarrassing was the client informing senior management about it. The person responsible was relieved of her responsibilities, and the client opted to take their business elsewhere, which sadly was the final nail in the coffin for the company I worked for. They were acquired by another business before the end of the year. When Windows 95 was released, it contained around 11.2 million lines of code. More recent versions such as Windows 11 contain around 50 million lines of code, or more depending on what options are chosen. Each character of code is an opportunity for a bug or a vulnerability to embed itself into the final release. All operating systems, applications, games, and programs will contain the odd mistake, typo, or other anomaly. Windows 95 was released before vulnerabilities were recorded and tracked as they are today. It is normal for manufacturers to release patches to resolve issues or vulnerabilities for many years after a product is released to market. The onus is on the owner to assess the risk and decide whether or not to apply the patch. Larger organizations, or those with dedicated IT teams, are likely to have patch management schedules on all of their devices. WannaCry ransomware took advantage of unpatched Windows devices to hit 250,000 systems in over 150 countries. Microsoft released a patch 2 months prior to WannaCry as a high-priority, critical update. Other massive cyber attacks caused by unpatched systems or applications include NotPetya, the Equifax breach, and Log4Shell. Stuxnet was a highly targeted piece of malware that took advantage of 4 Windows zero-day vulnerabilities. As far as I'm aware, Stuxnet was the first cyber-physical sabotage malware that weaponized vulnerabilities to cause real-world damage, in this case destroying an estimated 1,000 Iranian nuclear centrifuges. Larger organizations with IT teams are likely to utilize a vulnerability management system of some sort. New vulnerabilities appear every day, and it's important that defenders know about them before the attackers. Even if a patch is not yet available, there are often mitigation measures that can prevent an attack. Smaller companies and individuals are often reliant on themselves to find out about vulnerabilities and patch systems appropriately. It's important to know what you have exposed on the internet and ensure that all devices are registered with the vendor, who should send notifications of any vulnerabilities. Patsy is a white hat hacker who has been tasked with trying to breach systems for a service provider that has around 15,000 active IP addresses. He has used his self-acquired access to their management network via one of their customers, and with that access breached a dozen or so network endpoints using default credentials. Given how many devices there are, he fancies his chances of finding a vulnerability that he can exploit. He first runs a tool that checks what services and versions of software are running on active devices. These results will give him a feel for the network and what is running within it. Next, he runs vulnerability scripts within the same tool. Right away, the tool starts to report vulnerabilities. Lots of opportunities for a bad actor to exploit vulnerabilities to create denial of service attacks, or opportunities to exploit deprecated versions of SSL if a bad actor wanted to create a man-in-the-middle attack. He doesn't have to wait too long before he strikes gold. A BMC, or baseboard management controller, is a specialized microcontroller that provides out-of-band remote management to a server. Unfortunately, this particular version has a vulnerability that stores credentials in clear text. He stores this and continues with his recon. He starts to scan for particular services such as HTTP, SSH and Telnet, and routing protocols like BGP. He cross-references identified services against known vulnerabilities and checks to see if there are any decent exploits available. He sees lots of vulnerabilities, but nothing too exciting. When it comes to vulnerabilities and exploits, the gold standard is for exposed credentials or remote code execution. Next up is the Microtic Service Port 8291, which is running on over 1,000 devices. He researches known vulnerabilities and checks to see what exploits are available. He is encouraged to see some good options and chooses an exploit that will present clear text credentials. It's only applicable to certain versions of Router OS, but with so many devices, there's a fairly good chance that at least one will be running a vulnerable version. He is probably pretty pleased with the outcome. 2 sets of credentials exposed for the world to see. He is able to use his recently acquired credentials to log into dozens of routers using their web portals and remote terminals. Not all of these routers have serious vulnerabilities. They are, however, still using the same credentials that were exposed by the vulnerable router. When he runs the known passwords against routers, they fall like dominoes. Upon completion of this exercise, he has full administrative control of around 50% of the provider network. He is fairly sure he has the passwords for the remaining routers, but not the means to connect to them. Yet. Perhaps we'll check in with Patsy again for a future episode. Of course, criminals can be undone by the same vulnerabilities that affect the rest of us. In early 2024, Lockbit were the most active ransomware-as-a-service gang with hundreds of affiliates using their infrastructure to launch attacks on thousands of organizations, extorting hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. A multinational task force was assembled to combat the gang in what became known as Operation Kronos. Law enforcement used the same principles that attackers use when hunting: reconnaissance, exploitation, and persistence. During the recon phase, an FBI hacker detected a critical vulnerability on the Lockbit server. The task force exploited this vulnerability to gain full access into the portal at the heart of the organization. This allowed them to map out the Bitcoin wallets of every affiliate and all of their victims. Although the Russian-based operator is still free, his identity is widely known and $100 million of illicitly obtained funds is now untouchable in his frozen Bitcoin wallets. Decryption keys were distributed to thousands of ransomware victims, and the criminal affiliates associated with Lockbit are only as anonymous as they have made themselves. Forensic analysts will find any mistakes affiliates have made when establishing their fake identities. It's important to understand your exposure to the internet. It's not just your router or internet endpoint you need to worry about. Every internet-connected device on your network needs to keep up with relevant patches and every application and individual component contained within. As we saw in the White Hat hack walkthrough, it only takes one vulnerability to open the floodgates. In most cases, it's best letting the operating system or application update automatically without any required interaction. I hope you found this episode both informative and entertaining. Until next time, stay safe between the wires and don't be an easy victim for cybercriminals. Cheers!